I appeal to colleagues who are leaving the chamber to do so quickly and quietly so the adjournment debate can be properly conducted. The question is, this House do now adjourn. Stephanie Peacock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I also place on record my thanks to you for selecting this debate, which I am pleased to have secured for one simple reason: to give the government chance to do right by retired miners and their families in my constituency of Barnsley East and coalfield communities across the country. I understand the significance of the Mineworkers pension scheme to other honourable members here today. My honourable friend, the member for Ashfield, who has brought so many of those involved together. The honourable member for Blaenau Gwent, who led the Westminster Hall debate. The honourable members who are themselves former miners, and the many other coalfield MPs who join me here today. This debate specifically seeks to address the injustices of the surplus sharing arrangement agreed in the Mineworkers pension scheme back in 1994. But I want to start by explaining just why it matters to so much to people in areas like Barnsley. Our community is one built on the coal industry. It once helped sustain some 30,000 jobs in the area, so many of those directly involved in mining itself, where the work was tough, difficult, dangerous. But aside from the economy that depended on it, the industry fostered an identity and sense of community spirit that lives on to this day. And in the same way that mining powered our community powered a nation. So I firmly believe that those who did so deserve nothing less than a fair arrangement that properly looks after them in later life. Unfortunately, the current scheme, agreed with the government upon privatisation of British coal in 1994, no longer does so. Back then, the government offered to act as a guarantor to the scheme, ensuring the pensions hard-earned by miners would not decrease in value.
Give way.
I will give way.
Can I thank my old friend for giving way? She's doing a great job here this evening. Would you agree with me that we're not disputing the importance of the government guarantee? This is giving retired miners like my uncles the peace of mind that their pensions are secure, and that's really important. The question is whether the government still needs to take a 50% share, more than £3 billion over 25 years, out of the scheme when they haven't made any direct payments into it. So it's finding the best way of giving former colliers and their families a fairer share of the pensions that's earned our focus tonight, which she's leading on.
The honourable member is absolutely right, and I want to make clear now, at this stage, my complaint is not with the deal at large. There are some concerns over the details of the bonus element of the pension, where disappointing investment returns could see bonuses lost over time and pensions worse off by around 30% in real terms, an issue I intend to press the Minister on later. But like the trustees, I acknowledge there are there are elements to this deal that are beneficial. I'll give way.
I would like to compliment my honourable friend on securing this really important debate. And just to echo her comments, the nation owes a debt of honour to the miners and the mining communities for providing the fuel that powered a nation. Many miners died prematurely, my own father in his 50s, my grandfather in his early 50s. What will happen to the surplus when the last of the miners and their beneficiaries have passed away? Where will that surplus go? And is that driving the government's actions?
He makes a really important point, and I'm sure the Minister has heard that and will respond in due course. So talking about the guarantee, it has provided a safeguard that has allowed them to follow higher risk and subsequently higher value investments that have proved lucrative. I'll happily give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way and really congratulate her on her fine speech. Just picking up on the point from the last intervention, isn't the very reason that there has to be action soon is that if there isn't, the mines themselves, whilst they're alive, will not get benefit from it?
The honourable gentleman is right, and it's an issue I'm going to come on to speak about in a moment, because the guarantee is not without its merits, but what this debate seeks to address is the specific surplus sharing arrangement which has seen government profit, as honourable members have said, so disproportionately at the expense of miners.
I
will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and congratulate her on securing this debate. Like her constituents in Barnsley, many in Doncaster share their same concerns. And does she not agree with me that when the scheme was first set up, the balance of risk was different? What we know now, all these years later, since 1994, does at the very least require a revision of looking at that balance of risk and being fairer in the future.
I thank the Honourable Lady and my Honourable Friend for her comments. I think she's absolutely right, and I'm going to come on to talk about that in a moment. And she talks about when the agreement was set up. Well, as admitted to me by the Minister in a written question asking what actuarial advice was taken, an agreement on which, and I quote, no such advice was obtained. Can we consider that for a moment, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this arrangement was put in place with no expert advice? It is little wonder that the initial prediction proved woefully inaccurate and the surplus has been substantially more than anticipated. And it shows, because the sheer amount of money that has been taken out by the government since 1994 without returning a single penny is staggering. The Treasury has pocketed £4.4 billion since 1994.
Shameful.
I'll give way, yes.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I'm sure many ex-miners, for example, in Coventry, we used to have 2 collieries there. I'll be very grateful to her for securing this debate and trying to put some wrongs right. And I'm sure they'd appreciate that very, very much, because a lot of them suffer from silicosis and different diseases. So she's done a great service to the miners in doing this.
I thank my honourable friend, and he's absolutely right. There are a lot of former miners taking a very great interest in this debate. No, not less because the government have taken £617 million this year alone, on top of £102 million over the last 2 years. And as if that is not already enough, they plan to take another £427 million over the next 3 years. I will give way, yes.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and I think she's making a really powerful speech. And does she agree with me that pensioner miners in areas such as mine in Durham should now be getting an enhanced set of benefits from this scheme, rather than the government creaming of this money? It's an absolute outrage.
I thank my honourable friend for her contribution. I know her constituency hosts the Durham Miners Gala, which celebrates the coalfield communities. And she's absolutely right. The money that the government have taken out, I repeat this, they have not contributed a single penny from their own funds. These are huge sums of money. I'll happily give way.
Thank you. I'm very grateful and congratulate her very much on getting this debate. The miners have had to fight every inch of the way for pneumoconiosis compensation and everything. And in my constituency in the Cunningham Valley, there is real anger and a feeling they've been cheated by the refusal to share out this surplus money in a fair and proper way.
The Honourable Lady is absolutely right, because these are huge sums of money involved, but actually for the individuals and families affected, it is striking how small the numbers involved are. I will happily give way.
I'm grateful to her and congratulate her on this speech. She's championing miners right across the UK, including in my seat in Ogmore. Would she also agree with me that we're running out of time? It's lots of widows who now receive the miners' pension. It's based on a reduction. So unless the government takes action now, we're going to be in a position where the money will just simply be taken up by the Treasury, and that can't be right for the thousands of miners left and their families.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, because the average pension is just £84 a week, but that is a lot less for widows in receipt of the pension, and some are forced to get by on much less. I've read one, for instance, receiving as little as £59 a week after spending the best part of 3 decades down the pit. I'll happily give way.
I thank my friend for giving way, and of course the North Staffordshire coalfields are some of the most prosperous and efficient coalfields in the country. But would she agree with me that the money the government is taking into the Treasury, if it was spent on pensioners directly, the economic impact of those local communities that have been starved of funds since then would be immense, and in some cases transformative?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. It's just totally unfair. How can it possibly be justified? £59 for a retired miner, £4.4 billion for the government. How is this fair? These are people who toiled for years in dangerous, gruelling conditions to help keep the lights on and our country running. I'll give way.
First of all, can I congratulate the Honourable Lady on bringing this forward, and the fact that so many people are here to register their support for what the Honourable Lady is saying. I'm here to do the same. The information that I have referred to the surplus sharing arrangement as a legalised but grossly immoral raid on the funds. Is it not time is now for this government to right a wrong?
The honourable gentleman is absolutely right, and that is the purpose of this debate. It is time that action was taken, because if we could consider what a difference it would make to pensioners' lives by diverting more money into their pockets rather than the coffers of the government. I will give way, yes.
I think my honourable friend is speaking very compellingly despite the many interruptions, and she certainly speaks to the sense of injustice in Doncaster North, in my constituency, around this issue. Has she had any discussions with the trustees of the Mineworkers pension scheme for their views on what they think a fair way forward would be?
I thank the honourable gentleman. I know he has championed this issue over many years, and I have indeed spoke with the trustees, and they are in agreement that we need to re-look at this. I will give way, yeah, but very briefly, I'm conscious of time.
I just simply would like to say, first of all, I hope she gets a review out of this at the very least. Secondly, I have always supported the mine workers in relation to the closing of the pits by Michael Heseltine, which is a long time ago, but the bottom line is the miners deserve to be properly looked after.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his contribution. I'm pleased we've got cross-party support for this today. That is very, very welcome.
Because you're a socialist at heart, Bill. Cross-party within a party. A party within a party, that's three parties.
Because the risk undertaken by the government in guaranteeing the pensions no longer justifies the price paid by the miners for that assurance. The membership of the scheme alone has decreased substantially over the following decades since the deal was struck. In 2006, there was 280 members. Now there are 160,000. The government's financial risk in their role as guarantor of the pensions is in permanent decline. Yet essentially, they are still charging miners the same price as they did 25 years ago. I will give way, yeah.
Can I, again, my honourable friend is completely right and making a really powerful case on behalf of mine workers all over the country. But just, we'd agree with me that we need to know whether the government is seeing the mine workers' pension as a source of income generation. Because if they are, that would be utterly morally wrong, given the contribution that the mine workers have made to our economy over so many years.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right. I'm sure the Minister has heard her question and will address it in good time. But never mind whether it is fair. From a financial perspective, the scheme fundamentally does not provide value for money for its members. I implore the Minister not to respond with platitudes about the benefits of the government's guarantee for the scheme. We know it has been beneficial, and I'm sure, as many a former miner from Barnsley will tell you, they know there is no such thing as a free lunch. I will give way, yes.
As a serving miner one time, with two broken legs, I just wonder sometimes when I see the newspaper about this Nigel Green and how, Sir Philip Green, sorry, for Philip Green, how he stole all the pensions. And here we are sitting here, and the government's stealing the pensions. They should be taking their nathus off them as well.
I thank the honourable gentleman. As a former miner, he speaks with passion and has done over many decades, and he's absolutely right. It is blatantly unfair that those who have spent a life working literally at the coalface will be left to struggle in retirement, when the government can instead help near 160,000 former miners still affected. This is their money, and I appeal now to the Minister to do right by them. I will give way, yes.
I thank my honourable friend, and as the grandson of a coal miner myself, I know that the speech that she's making is so important for the communities that we represent. The Prime Minister, when she took over, stood on the steps of Downing Street and said there are burning injustices that are affecting our nation. Would she agree with me that this is one of those burning injustices? And if the promises the Prime Minister made are to mean anything at all, this wrong must be righted immediately.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. It is totally unfair, and that's why I want to come on now to ask the Minister to dispel the concerns I briefly touched on earlier and protect the bonus element of the members' pensions, which will prevent real-term losses to pension value in times of poor investment return. And And most importantly, is the Minister prepared to amend the surplus sharing scheme and meet with the Coalfield MPs, the scheme trustees, members and the NUM to discuss the revision, including consideration of the recent NUM Commission report which suggested a 90-10 split in favour of the miners? Now, miners and their families in this country had their way of life ripped apart. They were branded the enemy within. Men were imprisoned because they were fighting for their jobs. Women ran soup kitchens because they were fighting for their community. Spirits were bruised but never broken. Tragically, too often, our miners were let down. The unfairness of this scheme cannot be allowed to stand as the final chapter in that dismal history. Retired miners have waited long enough for what they have only ever wanted, their fair share.
Gloria De Piero. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank my honourable friend for securing this debate, for an excellent speech and for the opportunity to speak very briefly on an issue that I am extremely passionate about. Many of us are now familiar with the shocking headline figures behind the Mineworkers pension scheme story. The government has received nearly £4.5 billion from the MPS since 1994. It has never had to pay a penny into the scheme in its role as guarantor. That it is still pocketing in the region of £142 million a year. These figures don't even include any monies that it has received from the other coal pension scheme, the British Coal Staff Superannuation Scheme, from which it has also made billions of pounds. Of course.
Would the Honourable Lady agree with me? But what is absolutely fundamental is that at the time of privatisation, any surplus was envisaged as a safety net, not as a cash cow for a government.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. My honourable friend absolutely hits the nail on the head.
Can I just confirm what my honourable friend for Caerphilly said? I served on the bill that privatised the coal industry from the Labour side in 1994, and those guarantees were given at that stage.
He's absolutely right to make that point. What the headline figures that I've quoted don't tell us are the personal stories of hardship that our ex-miners and their widows are facing. The average weekly pension, not much more than £80 a week. It's hardly a sum that you could live a luxury lifestyle on. MPS pensioners rightly feel aggrieved at seeing the profits from their pension investments being used to boost the Treasury's coffers. An MPS pensioner from my constituency called into my office recently to show me his recent pension statement. He'd received the news that thanks to an increase of 3.4% to his guaranteed pension and a bonus of 4.2%, his pension was going up to the grand total of £74.71. That is not, of course.
Thank you so much for giving way. Would you agree and to remind the government that actually this is deferred income, that this has been earnt by miners, this isn't a gift that we are blessing on them, and it is their money, not anyone else's?
And that is why it is clear that there is this real need for the 50-50 surplus sharing arrangement that was put in place when the government became guarantor to be renegotiated across.
Can I thank both honourable members for such powerful speeches? Does she agree with me at a time when we had 40,000 excess deaths, at the highest level we've seen for 40 years in this country, many of them old people, when we see pensioners' income under attack from higher inflation and the risks to their benefits, their free TV licences, that this is a wrong which must be righted by the Minister, and that these communities were devastated when their pits closed. So these people have lost income during their lifetime and they're now being denied it in retirement.
Absolutely. And the government has made far more money than was ever forecast, and it would be the decent and correct thing to do. To give
grateful to both my honourable friends for raising this matter. The calculation was made in the privatisation in 1993-94 was on the basis there was still a lot of coal mines open at that time. Quite clearly that is not the case now, and it's quite clearly people are looking at this. It is a milk cow for government, and I don't know how many years the government are going to keep looking at this to try and get some sense from it. It is wholly wrong, and whilst we can quote about the increases in miners' pensions as well, it's quite often a lot of it has been lost because these people are means-tested benefit to start with, and we should recognise that.
My honourable friend raises a very good point from a wealth of experience of campaigning on this issue. So myself, Labour colleagues from other coalfield constituencies, the National Union of Mine Workers, other campaigners, and crucially, and I know that the Minister shook her head when my honourable friend raised it, but the trustees of the Mine Workers Pension Scheme, who I and other colleagues have met and who have told me to my face, this is not right. They know it's unfair. They know that the schemes need to be renegotiated, and approaches have been made to the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, but no meaningful efforts to engage have been made by the government. It has to change. It has to change quickly, because the number of MPS pensioners is decreasing every year. Action needs to be taken now. So I ask the Minister to commit to giving ex-miners a fairer share of their pension fund surpluses now.
Minister Claire Perry.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I sincerely congratulate the Honourable Lady on securing this debate and for a superb, passionate speech. It was brilliant to hear. Look, I need to declare a very strong interest in this matter, Madam Deputy Speaker. There is a reason that I take my stewardship of this scheme incredibly seriously, and that's because my mother-in-law is a beneficiary. She is a widow. Her husband, Bill O'Neill, who was a leading light in the Coke Workers Union, died very young as a result of his many years of service underground. Indeed, my husband turned down a job in the Kersley pit at the age of 16, but got into trouble at university for helping organise the blockade of the ports on the East Coast to stop the imports of Polish coal. So I won't take any lessons from anybody in this chamber as to the impact of this scheme, or indeed the feelings that have been raised over the years, which were so powerfully expressed by the Honourable Lady. And I do completely share her view that, one of the things we always need to focus on is the sheer blood, sweat, tears and toil that went in to building our industrial revolution. And one of the rather marvellous bits about my current portfolio is the opportunity to perhaps repurpose some of that work through things like geothermal energy projects to basically create energy for the next generation based on the effort that went in. What I wanted to do was pick up some of the points she raised about how the scheme is actually working, touch on some of the issues around the cash flow, and set out, because I think it's a little unfair, the Honourable Lady saying there isn't engagement. There has been a lot of engagement on this process, and I continue to be interested in what the trustees are bringing forward, and indeed was discussing, if I can just make a bit of progress, discussing this with the Chancellor only today, very briefly.
Can I thank the Minister for giving way? I understand that the Mine Workers Pensions trustees tried to meet the department before Christmas to talk about the issue of the guarantee, but they still haven't heard from the department about a meeting. So will the Minister pledge this evening to meet the Mine Workers Pensions trustees within the next fortnight?
I will. I met them, met the trustees, who I think have done an exceptionally good job with the scheme, and I'm going to come on to that last year. We have been in discussions with them about their proposals, and I'm shocked to hear that they were told that that meeting wasn't available. The meeting is available when they want it. But let me. Yes, I will.
Over to the Minister. Can she inform the House whether there was a review process written into the 50-50 split when that decision was made? And if not, would it not now be the honourable thing for the Government to agree to that review, not least because it's been over 20 years, I believe, since the 50-50 split was decided?
A factual point I was going to come on to, but of course this split has been reviewed previously. It was last reviewed in 2002 by the then Labour government. The then Minister of State for Energy reviewed the split and said the trustees have been advised that the government does not feel it would be right to adjust the current 50-50 surplus sharing arrangements, referencing the fact in there that, of course, markets can go up and can go down. And in fact, in 2002, the scheme was in deficit, as it then was in 2008 and 2011. So the then Labour government made, if I just finish, made the decision then that, given the future unpredictability of the scheme, it would not be correct to review those pension surpluses. So it is not correct to say it has not been reviewed, and indeed the former Labour government made the decision not to change the surplus sharing arrangements.
She'll acknowledge that review was quite a few years ago now, and the scheme was in a very different state then. There were over 150,000 less miners and their widows now. The risk for the government is substantially less now than it was then.
Apples and pears.
So the point she makes is a valid one, but she's also, as she said, if the scheme had been reviewed at that point, then many more thousands of people would have been in receipt of a higher pension. And of course, the reason it wasn't, the decision I think was taken not to review, is A, because of the volatility that is inherent in the scheme for which government is a guarantor, but also because the proposal that somehow this is cash that then sits in the government's coffer, government has no money of its own. So the money that has come into the scheme has been spent directly in many cases in the coalfield communities. We've spent over £1 billion. Well, hang on, we've spent over £1 billion of government money in the coalfield communities over the last 20 years. Since 2010, we've committed an additional £70 million. The point is, if the money comes into government, it's part of the government's general receipts and can then be recycled. It's helped to contribute to the benefits that many other pensioners have received. Now, let me just make some progress. So there is a question about where we...
Order. Some important questions have been asked, and I'm sure that people want to hear the answers from the Minister. Minister.
Mental fallacy, I'm afraid, at some of the arguments that are being made, which I suspect is why the previous Labour government also made the decision not to review the surplus sharing, which is that this money is coming into government and is then being spent to support pensioners in many ways, free prescriptions, free bus passes, etc., etc. So it is not correct to say that that money is sitting there. No, I'm not giving way. There's some important questions have been answered. I think I was generous in allowing 2 speeches. I'm going to now. I'm not giving way. So let me turn to what is actually happening with the scheme. So as the Honourable Lady was quite right in saying, the scheme continues to function. The numbers are falling. It is rather unique. The only other scheme that's like it, I believe, is the same scheme that's been set up for rail workers, where the government essentially is the guarantor of this scheme. That fundamentally, any liabilities that the scheme ever incurs comes back to government. And what I want to do is point out that because of that, the trustees, who do include ex-miners, have done an amazing investment job. So because of that guarantee, basically it's a government-backed scheme, returns from the scheme are at least 1/3 higher than they would otherwise have been. So it has generated a lot of value. And do you want to have answers, or do you want to keep asking questions? Because I love the Honourable Gentleman, I'll take a question.
So I thank the Minister for giving way. And listening to what she said, we on our side argue the government's had at least £3.5 billion in surplus in recent years. The Minister says the government has spent £1 billion in coalfield communities in the last 20 years. That feels to us on this side of the chamber that our communities have been shortchanged by £2 billion. So, given that the last review was nearly 20 years ago, why doesn't the Minister do the right thing now and agree to another review?
I'm sure the Honourable Gentleman will be the first to acknowledge, and in fact the Honourable Lady made the point, that sadly one of the results has been that many people who are in receipt of this pension scheme, including the Honourable Gentleman who was in his place, no longer live in those coalfield communities, but they have benefited as pensioners from many of the other pension benefits that income has gone towards providing. So can I just turn, and the Honourable Lady raised the question about what the trustees say. So I met and was incredibly impressed with the trustees, and I think relative to other schemes, the results they provided, and indeed the compassion and generosity with which they administer this scheme, is second to none, and we should absolutely pay tribute to them for that. And I do point out again that the returns from this government underwriting of the scheme are about 1/3 higher in real terms than they would have been. But I want to turn to what I think is something that has been suggested by the trustees. When I met the trustees, and the Honourable Lady and I, maybe we should meet them together to have the same conversation. I'm very happy to do that. What they indicated to me was that they understood that actually changing the surplus sharing arrangements, as was considered by her last government and rejected, was actually not the biggest priority. The biggest priority was protecting the accrued bonuses and making sure that the scheme could proceed on that basis. They have come forward with some excellent proposals, and I commend them for that. And I had a short discussion this evening with my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, about my interest and the Treasury's interest in properly reviewing those proposals and taking them forward. And I, as I've committed to the Honourable Gentleman, am very happy to have those conversations face to face. So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I genuinely admire the speech the Honourable Lady made. It is brilliant to see her and so many colleagues standing up for a group of people who many may argue, gave more than they received from the system. And as a family member, I am proud to acknowledge that and proud to stand up as the steward of the scheme and pledge to her that I will do my best to ensure going forward it continues to deliver. I do want to say that the proposals made by the trustees are excellent, albeit we need to look at the cash flow implications. We will continue to explore options, and I am very happy to do that on a cross-party basis with all honourable members and right honourable members who would be interested in doing so.
Thank you. The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.